And okay, we're live streaming.
Madam Chair, this is Kelly. We are live on social media and the webinar is now live.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I now call to order the meeting of the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. Today is Monday, March 22nd, 2021. The time is 5 p.m. and this meeting is being held utilizing the Zoom web conferencing platform as well as live streaming through Facebook and YouTube. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Clayton.
Present.
Commissioner Combs.
Present.
Commissioner Gasco-Bentley. Commissioner El Hassan.
Present.
Commissioner Robeson. Commissioner Kosaraju. Commissioner Lara.
Present.
Madam Chair, you have 4 members, which is a quorum.
Okay, did I hear Commissioner Gasco-Bentley say present? Because she is here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was on mute and I didn't realize that, but
Okay.
I'm present.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, having a quorum, we will now be in session. The next agenda item is approval. Agenda item is the approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve or amend the agenda?
So moved.
Motion has been made by
Support.
Commissioner Combs. Any discussion on the motion?
I think I'd like to move to amend the agenda if possible,
Yes, Commissioner El Hassan?
so long as Commissioner Combs is okay with the friendly amendment.
Oh, absolutely.
If we can, thank you. I propose that we move public comment to the end of the agenda so we can get through our commission business.
A motion has been made to amend the agenda to move public comment to the end of the agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, the motion was made by Commissioner El Hassan and seconded by Commissioner Lara. We will move public comment to the end of the agenda. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed, that motion passes. Our next agenda item are our opening matters. And when we begin, I would like to acknowledge that on March 1st, Vernon Jordan, the former president of the National Urban League and a civil rights activist, died. Mr. Jordan had close connections in all corners of American politics, including presidents from Democrats Lyndon Johnson, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama to Republicans such as Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush. Unfortunately, soon after that, on March 6th, Frank Kelly, the People's Attorney General, passed away. Some of his legal crusades are legendary and are still remarked upon now, decades later. However, unknown to many is how Mr. Kelly pursued equality in his office and gave Black and female lawyers opportunities that they never had before. And since our last meeting, there's been an increase in hate crimes against the Asian American community, including the horrific killings last week. Commissioner Kosaraju will now say a few words on behalf of the commission. Oh, and she is not here yet.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry. There you are. Okay, thank you. Okay, good afternoon, Commissioner.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairs Clayton, and I appreciate the opportunity to just make a couple of statements regarding the surge in hate crimes. The state legislature has passed a resolution last week, and I also wanted to point out that while that is a very right step in the direction that we want to have a process of healing and coming together as a nation, that making Asian American feel welcome and not be threatened for their own physical safety and that of their children has to be an issue of concern for all Americans. It's not about one community. And I'm hoping that our state legislature, leadership at all levels appreciate that this is un-American at every level. And the world is watching us as we battle a pandemic and we see an epidemic of a hate crime happening parallel to a pandemic. That is not sitting well in the global community. I can say that the global community, which saw America as the place where everyone would risk everything to come to make a better life and to change America for the better for all of us, that very American competitiveness will come under threat if we continue to spread hate and not love and be the beacon to the world. I'm really appreciative of this time. And I want to point out that in the resolution passed by the House, both Senate and the House have identified the numbers to call and report acts of hate against Asian Americans. And I urge people to do that because even with the reported high number, that is still only 5% of the actual crimes that are reported. So if we're seeing a report of 4,000 crimes, and that's about 5 to 10% of the actual crimes, you can imagine what the size of the problem is. And I urge each one of us in our role as community leaders to reach out, dismantle stereotypes, and educate how we as a country can only move forward as we all act as Americans and respect and love each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Do we have comments from any other commissioners before we move on? Seeing none, our next item will be the public comment protocol. We will hear from Deputy Director Mary Engelman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today's meeting will be recorded. All speakers must identify themselves by name first before speaking. If you require closed captioning and you are using Zoom, you can turn on captions by clicking on the CC icon on the lower right part of your screen. The Commission has already received written public comments and will only be accepting verbal public comments during the meeting. If attendees wish to speak during the public comment portion of the agenda, you must sign up to do so within the next 10 minutes by typing your name and city of residence in the chat box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If unable to type in the chat box, please click on the raise hand icon to raise and lower your hand at the lower center of the Zoom screen. When it is time for public comment, staff will call on attendees in the order in which we receive the request to speak, whether via chat or raised hand. MDCR staff will first verbally identify public comment speakers by name, and then that individual will be asked to unmute and will be muted after their designated time frame for speaking ends. The public comment time frame for speaking will be 2 minutes. There will be a visual timer on screen showing the following colors: green for 2 minutes, yellow for 30 seconds, and red for stop. The timekeeper will verbally remind each speaker within 30 seconds when 30 seconds remain. For attendees who are calling in by phone to provide public comment, callers must enter #2 on their mobile device to raise and lower their hand. MDCR staff will identify callers who wish to speak by the last 4 digits of their phone number. Please also be aware that MDCR staff will verbally warn any speakers only once if they use inappropriate, inflammatory, or disrespectful language. If use of that language continues, the speaker will be muted. For those who are joining us live via the MDCR Facebook page or the MDCR YouTube accounts, there will be an approximately 20-second delay between the actual Zoom meeting. Individuals who wish to deliver verbal public comments can only do so if they are attending via Zoom or by phone. And that concludes the rules.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Director Engelman. Just a couple of things. One, I do want to note, depending on the number of hands we raise for public comment, it may be 1 minute instead of 2. That will depend upon the number of hands we have raised. And also, I want to make sure that everyone knows, for our attendees, I do see some names that are popping up in the chat. The only way that you will actually be recognized for public comment is that you must raise your hand. You must raise your hand. If you put your name into the chat, that does not register you for public comment. You must raise your hand and you will be called upon at the appropriate time. Our next agenda item is adoption of the consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move for the adoption.
Motion has been made by Commissioner Combs. Is there a second?
Second.
And it has been seconded by Commissioner El Hassan. Is there any discussion on that? All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. And will you please let the record show that we have been joined by Commissioner Roberson. Good afternoon, Commissioner Roberson.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. The next agenda item is approval of the minutes from the January 25th, 2021 meeting. May I have a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
So moved. Support.
Motion has been made by Commissioner Lara. May I have a second?
Support.
Seconded by Commissioner Combs. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? None opposed. The minutes are approved. We will now go to our guest presentations. May we please have our first speaker, Dr. M. Roy Wilson from Wayne State, brought over, please. And if someone can let me know that is happening.
Madam Chair, we are promoting Mr. Roy Wilson.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Dr. Wilson does not appear to be moving over. He may have stepped away from his computer. I'll try again. Madam Chair, Dr. Wilson has joined as a panelist.
Okay. Good afternoon, Dr. Wilson. We'll wait on you to turn your camera and, oh, there you are. Okay, they keep moving around. Okay, good afternoon, Dr. Wilson. Our first speaker is Dr. M. Roy Wilson, president of Wayne State University, member of the Michigan Coronavirus Task Force on Racial Disparities, and former deputy director at the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities. Good evening, President Wilson, and thank you for speaking with us this evening as we have just passed the 1-year mark of the COVID-19 pandemic. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. I'm not sure exactly what was wrong with the technical issues there, but I assume that you can hear me and that you can see me now.
Yes.
Okay. Well, certainly in the early days of the pandemic, particularly in March and April, there was quite a bit of a disparity in Blacks getting COVID and then dying from COVID. And, you know, all of us have heard the reasons why. Certainly the social determinants of health really began to be focused upon in a way that I really haven't seen before. The importance of where you work, what type of job you do, where you live, how you live, in terms of like where you work and what kind of job you do, depending on whether or not you could do remote type of work, white collar type of work versus blue collar type of work that required you to be on the job physically. You know, those kinds of things really made a big difference in terms of, you know, where you live and how you live, you know, how big your house was to be able to physically distance. You know, those things really did make a big difference, and focus on them will finally, given the kind of focus that was what I think was very, very important. But, you know, what's important to know is that from around mid-June onward, there was a significant shift in this disparity. And then probably, I think it was late September, the governor showed some data that showed that this disparity had really actually been completely wiped out. At that time, if I remember right, even though Blacks make up about 15% of the population of Michigan, the data at that time showed that they're getting about 8.2% of the COVID cases, not the 15% that you would expect. So you could actually even say that being Black had a protective effect by that time. Unfortunately, the data showed that was for the past 2 weeks. And so a lot of people interpreted that it was only 2 weeks worth of data. What it was actually there was documents generated every 2 weeks and updated every 2 weeks. And the data was from the past 2 weeks, but it was the exact same pattern since mid-June. So this had been for quite some time. Now the question is, you know, why is that? First of all, let me just say that this is something that is very unusual to be able to have that kind of reversal in health disparity on such a short time frame is very unusual, and it has been recognized nationally. I'm not sure exactly how public it is, so I won't mention the organization, but a major national organization will be awarding the Michigan Coronavirus Task Force on Racial Disparities a major award on April 14th. The other awardee is going to be the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center, which is the place where you get all the data that related to the COVID-19 worldwide. And so it's a pretty big deal. And it's because it is so unusual to have this kind of reversal. So why is that? Well, you know, my feeling is that one of the major reasons is that Blacks were affected early on and very, very hard. Just about everyone, particularly in Detroit, which is where I live, knew someone, and many people knew many people who not only got the disease, but died from COVID-19. And so I think this early publicity on that may have caused some behavioral change and more compliance with mask wearing and with physical distancing. Also, there was certainly a lot of publicity related to implicit bias, potentially some implicit bias that was operational in Blacks trying to seek care in the emergency rooms and being turned away. Those kinds of things were also well publicized. And then finally, I think there was much greater accessibility to mobile testing, which I think is important because, certainly many Black subjects cannot go necessarily to testing sites because testing sites weren't in the neighborhoods where they live. And some didn't have transportation to get there. And so to actually have mobile testing was, I think, very important. And the reason why I think that having this reversal publicized is important and to study it is so important is because what can it really teach us about reducing health disparities more generally? When you really think about it, it was in 1985 when the then Surgeon General, actually the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Margaret Heckler, released her report on minority health, which showed that there were 60,000 excess deaths in minority populations, mainly African American, that had died, excess deaths that would not have happened if the rate of disease for some of the things like cardiovascular disease and others were the same as for the white population. That was 1985, so that's 35 years ago. And the changes that have been made since that time in terms of the disparities really haven't been very much at all. I mean, really, we're basically almost the same as we were in 1985. And the reason is because when you think about it, many of these diseases like cardiovascular disease, stroke, high blood pressure, diabetes, it has a very long time frame. So it may take decades to really show a difference between two groups of people in terms of the death rates. And so it's hard to really study interventions and get some good data out of that. Whereas when you think about what happened with COVID-19, you have a situation with a high incidence, many people were getting it in a short time to outcome. It was weeks rather than decades. And so you can actually do some interventions and see what the outcomes of those interventions might be. And so I think it's really important to take lessons from that and see what can be learned from COVID-19 racial disparity to the more general problem of racial disparities in other diseases. Now, more recent data shows that the reduction in the COVID-19 deaths and COVID-19 infection rates in the Blacks compared to the general population has begun to wear off. I haven't seen data over the last few weeks on that, but I'm afraid that as the vaccination rate in the Blacks have lagged that of the general population, that we're going to start having the same problem we had in March and April very soon if we don't get on top of this. The vaccination rate in the African American population is much lower right now than in the general population, and that is in all age groups, which is particularly of concern to me in the older age groups because those are the ones that are most susceptible to hospitalizations and in death. And so we have to keep a real close eye on that to make sure that the vaccination rate in the minority populations pick up and equal that of the general population. Otherwise, we are going to go backwards. On April 5th, as you all know, the vaccination priority opens up so that those who are over the age of 16 will be able to get vaccinated. And I think it's the right thing to do from a public health perspective, particularly as the supply of vaccines begin to outstrip the demand. You know, I certainly know a lot of people, and I'm sure you do too, who Blacks who want to get vaccinated, but they can't because they're not in one of the priority groups, but they want to get vaccinated. So I think from a public health perspective, opening it up as will occur on April 5th is the right thing to do. And certainly this was advocated by another group that I'm on, the Michigan Economic Recovery Council, that have been advising the governor on some of these issues. And so I'm just gonna stop there. I think I've spoke as long as you expected me to speak. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Otherwise, again, I just wanna thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. I'm not.
Can't hear it.
Commissioner Clayton, you're on mute.
No, we can't hear it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You did answer one of the questions that I had. I made a note about were there any disparities in the vaccination rate? So you did touch on that, so thank you. Do any of my fellow commissioners have any questions for Dr. Wilson? Commissioner Holmes? Oh, and then I'll come to you, Commissioner Gaskell-Bentley.
Yes, Dr. Wilson, I was curious as to what your thoughts were on the seemingly a natural immunity that seems to be developing in the general population to assist those people who are affected by COVID in overcoming the virus without a vaccine. What are your thoughts on that? Because the numbers seem to be significant in terms of those people who are diagnosed with COVID, and then if in fact they have not been vaccinated, they're overcoming or they're successfully beating the virus, so to speak. And what are your thoughts in terms of how that is going to affect people's perceptions of their need to be vaccinated?
Right. Yeah, good question. So first of all, you know, the goal is to reach herd immunity, which is probably going to be somewhere around 80% of the population needs to be to have some sort of immunity in order to get herd immunity. And you can get herd immunity by two ways. One is by vaccination, and the other one is by natural immunity, which is what you're talking about. But when you think about natural immunity, the numbers are much smaller. Right now, we're probably talking around, for every person that's diagnosed, there's probably maybe 3 people who've contracted the disease but has not been diagnosed. But even if you put those two together, you're really talking about somewhere around 12% of the population perhaps have some sort of natural immunity. And you've got to get up to 70, 80% herd immunity. And so I think some people will say, well, I've been because of natural immunity, I don't have to get vaccinated. But the truth of the matter is that there's not enough people will have the natural immunity in order to make a dent in the herd immunity. So you need both people who have been naturally immunized, but the greater portion of people are going to be people who have been vaccinated. And then even if you've gotten natural immunity from having had the COVID-19, we don't really know how long that's going to last. And so booster shot, booster of the immunity with shot is really recommended.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Commissioner Gaskell-Bentley?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for the information. And this is more of, I would like to share with them, if anybody knows any workers or anything up towards the 3 county areas up here in northern Michigan. Our tribe we vaccinated all of our citizens and everything that wanted to take the vaccine, and all of our frontline workers and everything. So we are opening it up to anybody up within this area. So I just wanted to share that and say, if anybody has any relatives or anything, they can go to our website and then get the information there to be able to sign up to get the vaccine through our tribe. So
You want to give that website?
It's LTBB, Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians, nsn.gov. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, but I just wanted to share that, so.
Yeah, thank you. Any other commissioners with questions or comments for Dr. Wilson? Yes, Commissioner Kosaraju.
Thank you, Chair Clayton. President Wilson, thank you so much for your remarks earlier. My question was regarding what else can we do to increase the vaccination among the populations that were actually worst impacted? Because I can't see us getting to herd immunity without that population being more aggressively immunized. And the second part,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
that's okay. And the second part was regarding the immunity. I know people may be thinking I don't need it because I already got it once, but those people, wouldn't they be still spreading the disease once they were reinfected? I think one of the studies that's coming out of the vaccination is that they're lowering transmission, like those that are vaccinated are unable to transmit. So I would say as part of the education, we need to inform people that even if you get it a second time, you can still pass it along. And so that's the other thing I think we should let people know. I think education still is a big component of getting more people immunized. And I just wanted to know what else is the task force doing to increase this education and awareness?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, and certainly education is a very, very big component. The task force has a subcommittee, I guess you would say, that's on communications. And I'm actually on that one also. And so every week we get together and talk about how we can better communicate and educate the public. So some of the things that you are beginning to see roll out now on the importance of vaccination is because of the work of this committee. You know, there's been much more studies done on what happens with the vaccination versus what happens with you get natural immunity, just because of the volume of people who've been vaccinated. And so we have much more data on that. And you're right, there are certain things related to natural immunity that we just don't know. We don't know how long it'll last. We don't know how much shedding is still going on if you were to be exposed again. And so the safest thing to do is to go ahead and get vaccinated, even if you have contracted COVID. In terms of your first part of the question, I think we have to continue, all of us, continue to do everything we can to make sure that we communicate and educate those that we come in contact with. I've written a couple of op-eds on this subject and have been involved with other people who have done larger op-eds on a national level related to this subject. And I think however way we can, whatever audience we have, that we should make our voices known. I have it used to be weekly, it's not quite weekly anymore, video that I do for the community here, the Wayne State community, but it's seen by thousands of people. And I talk about the vaccine, all the time, and the importance of being vaccinated. So all of us have a role in trying to urge those who we love and those who we know in the community to be vaccinated, because that really is the only way that we're going to get to herd immunity and beat this thing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Commissioner Lara?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Wilson, for your comments. I am concerned that the incidence rate of COVID seems to be rising in Michigan, and we have most recently been singled out as having the highest rate in this nation right now. I'm concerned about trying to get that rate down, but the other thing is, as we're opening up, a lot of organizations that I talk to and belong to are somewhat concerned that we're going to open up and then we're going to shut right back down again. And that's, what are the comments of the task force regarding going back and forth and back and forth?
Yeah, I think most of us who are involved in public health in one way or another share your concern. It's been a long year, and I certainly understand the people getting anxious to get back to normality, but some of the behavior that's going on, I don't know if you've seen the pictures of South Beach today.
Yes.
It's ridiculous. I mean, people, COVID what? I mean, it's like, you know, like COVID doesn't exist. I don't want to pick on just the people in South Beach, because this is really throughout the nation where people are beginning to relax a little bit too much. And those of us in public health have been urging everyone to just hold on just a little bit longer. You know, we've got to get in front of this with more vaccinations before the increased rate of infections really start overcoming. And, you know, quite honestly, it's not just the increased rate of infections have not only plateaued, but it's beginning to rise. But it's the specific variants that I'm concerned about. You know, in Brazil, for example, the Brazilian variant is particularly difficult. It's much worse than the variant from Great Britain. You know, and people are just young people in Brazil are being affected and are going to the hospital and are dying. So the variants are something that we have to be very mindful of and be very respectful of. And there's some evidence that the variants may not react to the vaccine as well. So anyway, it's a concern. It's a very big concern, and we gotta all not only urge people to take the vaccine, but also urge people to continue with masking and social distancing until we get ahead of this, and we're not ahead of it right now.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Any questions or comments from any other commissioners before we move on? Okay, seeing none. President Wilson, thank you very much for being here with us this evening. You are more than welcome to stay with us and view the remainder of the meeting. If you're not able to, we do completely understand, but we did want to extend that invitation to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. If we can bring over our next speaker, which is Dr. Pamela Pugh. And I saw there were 5 hands that were raised for public comment a few minutes ago. Now I only see 1. I'm not sure what happened. I'm going to leave public comment open for a few more minutes before we close it. So if anyone is interested in public comment, you need to raise your hand, because we will be shutting it down. And the hands that are raised at that time will be the ones that will speak when we get to the end of the meeting. And I see Dr. Pugh is with us. And Dr. Wilson, as I said, if you want to stay, you can. If not, you could turn your camera off and we will move you back to the attendees list. Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Pamela Pugh. I will give you a quick introduction if you don't mind. Dr. Pamela Pugh is Vice President of the State Board of Education, has a doctorate of public health from the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and previously worked for the cities of Flint and Saginaw. Dr. Pugh also founded Regeneration LLC, which serves as a catalyst for economically sustainable and healthy urban communities. Good evening, Dr. Pugh, and we look forward to hearing from you regarding the reopening of schools here in Michigan. You may begin. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Am I freezing? Okay, there I am. Thank you, Commissioner, Madam President Clayton, and to Director White, and to this distinguished panel. Thank you for having me again. Maybe it was, I can't remember, was it December when I was here last? And so now we're seeing sunshine. While we're seeing sunshine, we know that our children are actually beginning to return to school in greater numbers. We're hearing numbers that around 84% of schools districts were open. Many of those school districts, which to me was not always made clear, were not heavily populated by BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, Brown, children of color. And they were often not the larger school districts that were in-person school, but many of those school districts are returning. Today, I know that Flint schools returned at their younger ages were were returned maybe about a week or so ago, and their older schools returned. They returned to a positivity, while in their community, they have a COVID positivity rate that has soared above 10%. In many of our communities, the positivity rate is upward of 15%, and most of our regions are right now in a high risk, the highest risk level that there is, which is a risk level of E, meaning that they have a per population case count of 150 per million or more. While our children are going to school, our stadiums have, the capacity for our stadiums have opened. Gyms have opened to a greater capacity, 30%. Dine-in in restaurants has gone up to 50% capacity. Keep in mind that it was, I believe it was from November to March, I might be getting my dates wrong, that we saw a 70% decline in our COVID rates. That was because the governor had put a pause on in-person school, high school, and in-person dining, and we saw a 70% decrease. And I think it was one of the commissioners that was mentioning this opening and closing thing that we're doing. When we see our rates go up, we see our death rates, our hospitalization rates, teachers that can't show up at schools, then we close the valve. We open the valve back up. So we've been playing this game here. And I too have written op-eds and have written one about making sure that we stop using that as our go-to strategy. And so I do want to mention, because we did have Dr. Wilson who talked about the vaccine rates, because our vaccine rates, he did mention, but I just want to mention that 2%, this is according to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services website, 2% of African Americans have been vaccinated, received two vaccine or completed their vaccination, 0.32% of Latinos, and 0.11% of our American Indian population, in comparison to 18.25 of our white population. 15% for the state of Michigan. When we look at places like Detroit, 7.7% of the population have received the complete vaccine, 2 vaccines. We go some places up here, like where I'm from, Saginaw, if we go north of here, we see those numbers go up to around 20% of their population. So we do see disparities. We're seeing disparities with vaccines at a time when our legislature was pushing for there to be strict guidelines on who could get the vaccine. That was also leaving us out. And we've talked about it. I've talked about it a lot. More than it being an apprehension issue, and Dr. Wilson pointed to this, it was an access issue. And so we need to make sure that we're pressing on those who have charge over the distribution, to make sure we have Saturday clinics, evening clinics, church clinics in as many neighborhoods as possible, making sure that we make access and distribution as equitable as possible. Getting back to the school children, many of our children who are going back to school are those that the data just lays out there have been the most impacted, most adversely impacted by COVID. Data has shown that 78% of children who die from COVID, Dr. Wilson talked about it. The cases may be low, but if you contract this illness, what is your outcome? When we look at children, our BIPOC children, 78% of the deaths of children were Black and brown and indigenous children, though they make up 42% of the population. That's nationwide. When we look at this thing called multiple inflammatory syndrome, where multiple organs can become inflamed, and it's an adverse effect that has been linked to COVID. When we look at the numbers, we see upward of 50% of those who have MIS-C, that those children under the age of 21 are Black or Latino. And they probably, though it's 50% of those who contract that illness, they're probably somewhere around 18% of the population. So that is overrepresentation. And these are the children who are returning to the schools at a time when COVID, as you all have said, is proliferating. And then we're seeing the variants that we don't know as much about, other than the fact that they are more contagious. And actually, data is showing that they are also more lethal. Michigan right now is number 2 in the nation for having the B117 variant. And then we've also detected our first a variant that comes from South Africa. So we're moving too fast and we're opening up everything at once. And we cannot say that our children are our priority. And this is how we show that they are our priority. Our children and our health are being used as bargaining chips by our legislature. We know that right now we have $841 million that's being held up at the state. And this fund is the funding that's supposed to help the buildings be safer. Those buildings where we know BIPOC children attend are the buildings that are going to be least adequate ventilation. Building conditions are going to be most deplorable because we've talked about the inequitable funding in schools. And so money is being held up, and that is because of the impasse that is due to the governor not turning over, or the Michigan Department of Human Health and Services powers over to the local health departments. Local health departments have stepped up and said that they don't want that type of power. That's not going to be the most conducive way to control this disease. I want to also say that some of our school districts were forced to open today on March 22nd by House Bill 4048. That was a requirement. And so coercion has been used to put some children back into school buildings. So, my remarks as I talk here is, we really need to be making sure that our legislature is shaking loose those dollars. They're much needed dollars. As we talk about and hear research, let's make sure that the research that's being used to say, move desks 3 feet closer together, make sure that the data that's being used to say it's okay for our children to go back to school, that it is generalizable, that the studies have been done on school districts that look like ours. And so there's so much work to do there. The questions that I'm pressing Michigan Department of Health, Michigan Department of Education to ask are more like, what have the schools done to address their air exchange? Have they taken part in funding that allows them to assess their ventilation systems? Do they have the funding to then correct the issues that are found with the ventilation systems? Because we know, and we don't hear it enough, that SARS, the virus that causes COVID, is airborne. And so we need to be more aware of what the environments are for our children. And so those are the questions that we need to ask. The research, how the building conditions are, looking at these soaring positivity rates, that is a huge concern. Water systems, returning to buildings, making sure that there's equitable mitigation as it relates to things like Legionella and lead in the water when you're returning to buildings where the water has not been moved. And in closing, I do want to make note, because the last time that I was here, the commission was looking at the issue of charter schools. And I do want to close and I want to talk about that, because I think as we talk about our children being used as bargaining chips, I still stand on the testimony and the information that I gave the last time, which was around, our children, people cashing in on our children. And I still stand and commend this commission for standing up and saying that we're going to try to stabilize our funding by holding back 25% of the funding. 25% of the funding for the homeschool. I commend you because when you said that, or at least for me, that does not mean that that funding comes from the school, from the classroom. It does not mean that that funding comes from the teacher's salary. It does mean that we can assess that funding that is going to that for-profit management company. And again, you know, I have no issue with parents calling me, emailing me, flooding me with emails, but for someone to say that I'm using discriminatory practices, that is totally off base. But if standing for our children, standing to make sure that those dollars get to the classroom versus profiteers, versus politicians like the DeVosses, then you can call me whatever you want to call me. I want to also make sure that people know that it was in 2017 that the NAACP stood for the same thing, the national NAACP, that called for to eliminate for-profit charter schools. No federal, state, or local taxpayer dollars should be used to fund or profit charter schools, nor should public funding be sent from nonprofit charters to for-profit charter management companies. So are they calling the oldest civil rights organization, in addition to this body, as using discriminatory practices against our children? No, we are standing for our children. We're standing for the children inside of those charter schools. We're standing for the teachers inside of those charter schools. We're standing for the stabilization of traditional public education. There have been 2 reports that have come out.
Dr. Pugh, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off, and if you could wrap up your comments, because we actually are going to be discussing our education equity report later on under commission business.
Okay, I'll just say these 2 things. There's 2 reports that have just come out this month, and both of them yet find Michigan, let me say this, Arizona, Florida, Michigan, and Ohio make up 80% of for-profit charter management companies, and Michigan leads the pack, upward of 70 to 80% of the schools privatized here in the state of Michigan, run by privatized management companies. So I understand the pressures that you all are under. I got tons of emails myself, but I will tell you, I continue to stand for our children, and I commend you and hope that you all are able to make the best decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pugh. And before I go to commissioner comments or questions, I just want to let everyone know that we will be hearing from Buzz Thomas later on in the meeting, who is the chair of the Michigan Association of Public School Academies. So just want to let everyone know we will be hearing from him once we get to this discussion in our meeting. Are there any comments or questions from any commissioners for Dr. Pugh? None? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Pugh. Thank you for talking to us about the schools reopening, the impact it could have on children returning to school, and also for, as always, sharing your thoughts regarding our education equity in Michigan report and the funding question. So thank you. We now, I am going to cut off public comment now. I believe I see 6 hands raised, but I'm being told that there are actually 10 people who are on the list. So if those who are monitoring public comment can note the last hand or the last hand name that is raised right now, and we are cutting off public comment, and we will hear from those people whose hands are raised during the registration period when it comes that time on the meeting. Our next agenda item is division and other reports. We will hear from Director White, and if Assistant Attorney General David Cannon is here, who's standing in for Assistant Attorney General Ron Robinson, if Attorney General Dave Cannon can be brought over while Director White is speaking. Good evening, Director White, floor is yours.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Commission, guests, and colleagues. I can only hope to be as informative as our 2 dynamic speakers, Dr. Pugh and Dr. Wilson. But I know I've got some big shoes to fill here listening to their report. It has been a very, very busy start to the year for the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, starting with, as the Commission is aware, our Commission Instructional Retreat I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the work of members of our team that put in the hard work and long hours, starting with Sylvia Elliott, Sheila McBride, and the entire team. But I do want to highlight Dan Stringer, Dan Levy, and Lori Vinson. The work that they put in and the presentations that they did were very well done and outstanding, in my opinion. Also, we continue to implement the strategic plan. We have actually completed the strategic plan as presented to the commission at the informational retreat. We're in the process now of rolling that out to the remaining staff of the department. We're trying to put together a digital copy as well as a hard copy for those who want it, and that's in process. We've also assembled, as I talked about before, to the commission, our diagonal slice meetings, which are our solutions meetings, and they are designed to increase communications among staff and management, to focus on collaboration and share best practices between the divisions. What we found is we've got a lot of good ideas that are working throughout the department, and we just wanted to make sure that we take down the silos and share that information internally. And that is going quite well. We've also used the diagonal slice process to look at our investigative process to try to make improvements to that investigative process with an emphasis on our service delivery and our customer service. And that's being led by Director Vinson and her team, and that's going very well as well. Our personnel updates, we have approximately 13, that's 13 open positions we've completed, going through the first phase of the hiring process by evaluating the applications, and we're in the process now of scheduling interviews. Those interviews and those positions will impact enforcement, law and policy, our equity office with our LGBTQ liaison, as well as community engagement. A few special announcements. Demetrius Hunter has been elevated from investigator in our housing unit, and he was promoted to civil rights manager of the Lansing enforcement unit, and that will take effect April 4th. We're in a process, still moving through our intern process and looking to start interns in the equity office, the communications office, community engagement division, and also, as you're aware, Chair, the commission. This process will be ongoing, and we will continue to keep that posting active because we want to make sure that we tap into our up and coming youth, as well as expose them to the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. As the commission is aware, morale continues to be something that we're working on in the department. From a leadership perspective, we talk about it literally every day. One of the things that we've implemented is some training for our leaders. And to that end, we've started what's called the Strengths Finders training. We did our first phase of Strengths Finders March 9th. We are going to have our second phase. And what Strengths Finders is a concept of really looking at an employee's strengths, as well as identifying your own strengths and not focusing on your weaknesses, but enhancing your strengths and understanding the type of leadership style you have when you are interacting and leading personnel. We are hopeful that that will be the first of many components of the Strengths Finder training, and we're going to be looking at implementing additional training segments for the executive team as we go forward. Under the direction of Deputy Director Engelman, she continues to move with the Home Connect program, which is not just a program to stay connected with our employee group, but to help increase morale, give them some tools to manage this very difficult time that we find ourselves in, trying to work from home, working through COVID and all the other obstacles and unanticipated issues that we're dealing with in this very unique and surprising time that we find ourselves in. She's had 2 meetings. Healthy Home was one of those meetings, and Fitness at Home. And I'm happy to see that that's still moving very well. Our Black History Month initiative just concluded. And I want to highlight the great work of Vicki Levengood in communications, Jeanette Johnson, and Jackie Derbyshire. They took an idea and they ran with it, and they did just an amazing job on highlighting those profound leaders who have had great impacts on Black history. So the reward, as I told them, for good work is more work. So we're looking at implementing that process each month in a different area to concentrate on. But I'm just really happy with that work. That was one of the nicest campaigns that I've seen since I've been here. We continue to work with our state partners and strengthen those relationships. I had the opportunity to meet with the new budget director, Dave Massaran, a person that I'm familiar with from the city, to talk about our budgetary needs, to talk about where I see the organization going in the future, to talk about how we're going to look at and assess our personnel needs as it relates to the types of complaints that we're taking, the anticipated increase in complaints as we become more widespread throughout the state. We had talked about setting up pop-up offices around the state, allowing people who may not know we're here to know that we're here. We are really strengthening our media campaigns, our social media campaigns, so just let the state know that we're here and that we're a resource. And in doing so, we anticipated increase in complaints. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. An increase in complaints could be from a couple different fronts. People who have felt marginalized, not listened to, and not knowing where to turn. So we want that. We welcome an increase in complaints because it gives us an opportunity to go in to assist our claimants, but also to change behavior, particularly in areas of housing and employment. So we're excited about the anticipated increase, but we want to make sure that we have the ability to service those complaints. So I was really excited to talk to Mr. Massaran about some of the dollars we were going to be asking for in the future. Also, I was very honored to attend the governor's cabinet meeting and represent our department, and also attend the State of the State briefing that was held January 27th. We continue to work with MAPAC, and as you're aware, Commission, we did a joint statement on the rise of racial and hate crimes against our Asian Americans on March 5th, and I'll have a little bit more to say about that towards the end of my presentation. Our strategic partnerships, do want to highlight those just very briefly. Certainly we continue to work with our all-PAC communities. We also work with the NAACPs around the state, obviously, but we are focused on some specific work that we're doing with Grand Rapids, City of Grand Rapids, as well as the Grand Rapids NAACP, which we'll be briefing the commission on very, very soon. And as I mentioned earlier, on March 17th, myself, Chair Clayton issued statements condemning the bias and bigotry towards Asian Americans. I also wanted to let the commission know that I was interviewed by Bridge, Michigan and Michigan Radio on these events and shared information on these complaints filed with MDCR. While the overall numbers of complaints that has been taken against Asian American or has been taken relative to Asian American discrimination still remains relatively small, the trend line is in fact troubling. To provide some context, the number of complaints in 2020 has more than doubled, even though those complaints are relatively low. In 2016 and 2017, the total number of complaints were 2. In 2020 alone, we received 5 complaints of discrimination in the area of public accommodations, as well as housing. As of last week, the Attorney General's office and various other law enforcement agencies had not seen the spike in Michigan that our counterparts are seeing around the state. But we still have some concerns. We've talked to our law enforcement partners, and they are as well concerned, recognizing that simply because the complaints have not been filed does not necessarily mean that the complaints are not happening. There could be some reluctance to file complaints. There could be this notion that the complaints will not be taken seriously. So we are still working hard here at MDCR to ensure that we're reaching out, that we're providing information in several different languages so that we can communicate effectively. And also we're using our social media to make sure that our Asian friends and family know that we are here and able to take these complaints. Also, we continue to work with MAPAC and other advocacy groups and monitor the situation. I will continue to keep the commission updated on any information that comes out of those meetings. And with that, I will take any questions.
Well, first of all, as you mentioned, February, Black History Month, you did programming. You're looking forward to doing that in other months. You still have a week left in Women's History Month. So that's my background. So you want to do some highlighting, you still have a week to get that done. Also, you mentioned interns. So besides the intern that we'll be looking for to work with the commission, are all of the intern positions filled for the various divisions within the department right now?
Chair, they are not filled yet. We have candidates selected, but they have not agreed to those positions.
Okay. And because it is rolling, you said it's ongoing, if anyone wanted to apply for an internship within the divisions of the Civil Rights Department, how would they go, or where would they go to do that, to find the availability of the positions and submitting their information?
We're going to be posting that on our website as well as on our social media. It has not been done yet, but that's how they'll be able to apply it as we put the program together.
Okay, very good. And then that's good for external people to know. And then commissioners also, we talked about this before, if there are those that you want to recommend, we'll make sure that the department gets that information also. Okay, thank you. Comments, questions from any commissioners for Director White regarding his report? Anyone? No? Oh, Commissioner Roberson, yes.
Commissioner Clayton, I know Director White, you said that, you know, the reward for doing a great job is more work, but my my reward would be to just say thank you to you and your team. My dad was one of the ones you all chose to honor during Black History Month. It has been an honor to watch what you all know about him that sometimes I'm not sure my brother and I knew about him. And I just want to say thank you again. We've also sent it to a number of family members who unfortunately, because of COVID, weren't able to be with us during our time of mourning. And so they've gotten a kick out of it as well. So thank you very, very much on behalf of my entire family.
It was our honor to do that, ma'am. Thank you. And Chair Clayton, to your point, as far as Women's History go, we did do a campaign with Women's History, and there has been. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Okay, all right, okay, very good. Thank you, okay. All right, any other comments from commissioners? Okay. Oh, yes.
Chair.
Yes, Commissioner.
I'll just say, I imagine that'll be part of the director's next report out.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Director White. Thank you. We are joined. I do see Assistant Attorney General David Cannon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. I don't know, it was Friday when we found out you were going to be joining us. Don't know if that's when you found out you were going to be joining us also, but if so, thank you for making yourself available, being here. I know you probably don't have a full report to give, but if there are any questions that commissioners have related to the report that we received in our packet, you can ask Assistant Attorney General Cannon about that. And then I also want to make sure before we're done that he provides the information for anyone who wants to report a hate crime to the Attorney General's office, that he provides that information also. So the floor is yours, Attorney Cannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it's an honor to be here, and I appreciate all the help. I only learned that I would be standing in on Friday also via the same emails, I believe. But that being said, we do have the written report, the Attorney General's Civil Rights Division February report. And I've certainly, I don't have firsthand information on it, but I certainly would get answers to any questions that anybody would have. Also, in your comment earlier, as I said, everybody's been very helpful indicating what might be expected here. And I did look up how we're processing the hate crimes notifications. And it's quite simple, actually. It's hate crimes, just hate crimes at michigan.gov. So everything through, of course, the michigan.gov website. So it's hate crimes at michigan.gov. And then a phone number to go with that, 313-456-0180. That's 313-456-0180. And though delivering a website and a phone number is not a lot to bring to the table today, but I certainly would pursue any questions anybody would have.
Thank you so much. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Anyone? Commissioner Combs?
Yeah, this question probably should be directed to Ron Robinson when he returns. But I was curious, Honorable Attorney General, what the focus of the department is going to be on human trafficking, and once again, crimes against women and children that seem to be rising. And when the Honorable Dana Nesso spoke to the commission when she was elected, she emphasized that she intended to increase the resources and the assets that the office has in addressing these issues. Your thoughts?
Yes, the Human Trafficking Commission has been quite active and has done a number of prosecutions. Also, there's been good cooperation with some of the local, some of the county, I should say, prosecutors. Particularly, I know Genesee, for instance, but others. And so I think there has been a fair amount of activity in that area. But I will obtain more detail when Ron could be the one that responds, or if he's not back soon, then I will. I'll try to get a little more detail on that. But I think it's a very active program right now, actually, in the human trafficking area.
Yeah, and if the department could assist us in giving some sort of presentation and highlighting their successes in these areas, particularly of human trafficking, because it's very disturbing to see how and what is going on in this footprint of crime in this state and across the country. And particularly, obviously, we're concerned about the state of Michigan.
Well, I think that would be something that would be very practical. There is another individual in my office that would bear that expertise without any doubt. She would be right on top of that. And I think she'd be honored to come in and speak.
We'll ask our chair lady to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Combs. Any other commissioners with comments or questions for the Attorney General's office? Okay, seeing none. Thank you so much, Assistant Attorney General Cannon, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you. We will now move on to agenda item number 9, which is commission business. And Director White already spoke to this, but I too, under my chair report, was going to talk about our instructional retreat that we had last month, and thank everyone within the department for putting that information together for us, as Director White did. I also want to especially thank Sylvia Elliott and Sheila McBride, who did all of the work to make sure everything was organized. All the presentations were there. All the staff knew it was the presentations that we were looking for and helping us to work on the agenda. So thank you very much to those ladies for that, and to the other staff and division directors who presented that day. I also want to say thank you to Alfredo Hernandez and the MDCR's Council for Government and Education on Equity and Inclusion Work Group, it's a long name, for their continued work on the recommendations on the Education Equity in Michigan report. As Alfredo mentioned at, I believe it was our January meeting, this group, I believe they only met once or twice last year, and they've had at least 4 meetings so far this year. So they're meeting basically almost every other week on the recommendations from our report. So we are very thankful to those subject matter experts who are providing their time, along with the superintendent and the I believe she's a deputy superintendent from the Department of Education. So very thankful for that work that they are doing. And that is a good segue into our next item of business, which is the discussion on the Education Equity in Michigan report. At the commission's special meeting, which was last November, we voted to have a funding analysis prepared comparing traditional and charter public schools funding. First, on that topic, we will hear from Commissioner Lara, who took the lead on behalf of the commission. We then will hear from TJ Buckholz from Vanguard Public Affairs, who is a consultant who wrote the Education Equity in Michigan report and performed the analysis. And then our final speaker will be Buzz Thomas. And Mr. Thomas spent 14 years in the Michigan legislature, where he served as a Democratic floor leader in the Senate and as a Democratic leader in the House. As I mentioned earlier, he is currently the board chair for the Michigan Association of Public Academies. But before we get to you, Commissioner Lara, and you do your presentation, are there any commissioners who have any comments before we get started? Any commissioner? Yes, Commissioner El-Hassan.
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. Just a few brief comments. Chair Clayton, you mentioned that we had a special meeting to discuss this report, wherein we invited really panelists from both sides of the aisle, if you will. Pro decrease in funding and certainly against the decrease in funding. And we had the honor and the pleasure of hearing out arguments on both sides and certainly considering them. So I'd just like to mention that our job as commissioners is to hear both sides. That's what we do. And the purpose of public comment and opinion is to provide us the opportunity to potentially revisit or reconsider or think things through based on recommendations that are made at that meeting or have been made in the past. That particular meeting made a request of us to revisit the indication in the Education Equity Report to reduce funding by 25% to charter schools. Thankfully, and I think we've mentioned it numerous times at that meeting and certainly at meetings in the past, particularly dealing with the Education Equity Report, that this was a living, breathing document and that we were looking to gain comments and feedback from the public, particularly from expertise of individuals in both sectors, the public schools and the charter schools, hence the purpose of the special meeting. And what transpired at that meeting was an indication from this group of commissioners recognizing our newest colleagues were not present at the time, but thank you for being so involved and passionate about this particular topic moving forward. But nevertheless, the commissioners that were present at that meeting indicated that they wanted to make an educated and informed decision as to whether the reduction was misplaced and should in fact be removed. To that end, we requested the analysis that will be discussed later today. So it's to my surprise, after that very thorough conversation and discussion that we had on really both sides of the aisles, that while we are open to comments and feedback and in fact invite that, along with, I think, the majority of my colleagues, if not all, my work email was bombarded by, at least the last count I had was 250 emails within a span of less than 24 hours. All of the emails that came in said the same thing. And all of those emails, the content of those emails was the same information and details that were presented at the special meeting. Again, I am not advocating that one should not present their opinion or should be advocating for an issue, but I think, I take note on the effectiveness of what is being attempted and how that effectiveness carries through. And as a matter of personal opinion, I don't believe that a 250 email bombardment is very effective. I think that I hope that whomever is listening tonight will understand that we want to do what's right and we want to have the proper tools to make the decision about what's best for the state and what's best for those students. And so I just wanted to put that out there to say that if anyone who attended that special meeting didn't garner what I just presented, then I'm sorry you missed a very significant meeting on a very important topic. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Commissioner Al-Hassan. Comments from any other commissioners before we get started? Okay, seeing none, Commissioner Lara, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. And before I do that, I'm going to echo what Commissioner Al-Hassan said. I'm going to thank you very, very much, because you came in, you jumped right in, you said, I get the data, I understand it, let me take a look at it. I've done some of this work before, so let me see what I can find out. So we appreciate your taking the lead on this for the commission, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, like I said, like has been explained before, is I'm new to the commission, so I'm coming in at the tail end, it seems, of a lot of different discussions, a lot of different data, a lot of different information. But I focus on the data, I focus on the analysis. My background is in finance, and I do a lot of analysis in all the different positions and roles that I've had, both professionally and different boards that I'm on. And so in order to make an informed decision, I focus, like I said before, on the data and then take a step back and say, what does this mean overall in context of what we're trying to decide? So as a result of that, I was focusing on what I would call the different buckets that expenses are placed in. And I speak in terms of buckets because it's been my experience that people who don't work with finance a lot, sometimes their eyes will glaze over when they're looking at numbers and data and they're trying to understand, what does this mean? So in doing so, the major buckets that I looked at were teacher salaries, administration, and facilities. So let's start with facilities. And I was looking at the differences between public schools and the charter schools. And I was trying to understand what was different. For example, in facilities, charter schools, most of them, if not all of them, have to pay some kind of lease or facility rent. And public schools usually don't. Teacher salaries, there's some question as to exactly how the teacher salaries work with compared to each other. But generally, from what I found, is the salaries for charter academies tend to start at a lower level. The other thing that I found out is that charter schools have only been around for 30 years. So if you're trying to compare the average salary between charter schools and public schools definitely have educators who have been there for many, many years. So that, of course, the average salaries would be much higher. And then looking at the what I would call the administrative parts or administrative costs. It's been my experience, particularly for smaller organizations, that you cannot have an expert in every single type of administrative area that's required to. And I will talk about human resources, for instance. There are so many areas within human resources that you need experts in that it would be detrimental if you had to, as the administrator or the top administrator of a charter school or even a public school, have to have expertise in all of these. I'm of the view that you go to the experts in that field. So those are the different buckets that I looked at. I spoke with TJ Buchholz from Vanguard Public Affairs, who did the initial report, and he did an additional report for us, really looking at the comparison between the private public schools and the charter schools. Generally, the funding is fairly similar. Then I also spoke with Grand Valley State University charters, I believe, over 70 schools. So I spoke with the two gentlemen in charge of that, Rob Kimball and Don Cooper, to try and understand those differences, as well as a conversation with Dan Quisenberry from the Michigan Association of Public School Academies. Based on those conversations, this is my personal assessment, is that the costs are fairly similar, but they are in different sizes of buckets. But they seem to be spent in a way that meets at least the minimum requirements for each school. Then the other thing that I looked at, keeping in mind that our goal is to determine what is best for the children, not what is best for public schools or what is best for charter schools, but what is best for the children of Michigan. And looked at demographic data of the students that were in charter schools as opposed compared to traditional K-12 schools. So the initial data that we received was overall for the Michigan statewide student demographic data for all of Michigan. Data point, and I'll just talk about economically disadvantaged, traditional K-12 is 47.6%, and for public school academies, 75.9%. You start drilling down and you start realizing that for example, white enrollment overall for the state of Michigan, traditional K through 12 is 69.3%, and for public school academies is 32.5%. And there's also similar with special education learners, 13.1% in traditional and 10.9% in public schools. So this is overall the state of Michigan. I'm not going to go into all the different detailed numbers, but I did ask for, we received data for Wayne County, Kent County, which is on the west side of the state, and Genesee County. And in all of those, public school academy population of children was more, particularly for economically disadvantaged, English language learners, African American, American Indian, and Hispanic than in white enrollment. So what you could see is that public school academies tend to serve more children that come from backgrounds that might be disadvantaged, either academically, economically, or because of access to schools that may not be as have as many resources as some of the other public schools. But then I said, okay, that's the big counties. Let's look at the smaller counties. So I received information on Saginaw County, Chippewa County, Grand Traverse County, Mecosta County, Charlevoix County, Isabella County, Menominee County, and Midland County. And I've actually been in all those counties, so I sort of know what those populations look like, and many of them are very rural. But with the exception of one, which is Grand Traverse County, again, I saw that change, that large balance of in the public school academies really serving children from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, as well as all the different BIPOC populations. So my conclusions were that before I came on the commission, I thought that charter schools were mainly focused on students that were economically advantaged, that were part of the majority population. But once I started looking at the data, that completely changed my understanding of what is going on between the public school academies and the traditional K through 12. That, as well as understanding that the costs are different within the different buckets regarding facilities, teacher salaries, and administrative. Each organization tends to focus on what makes sense for them. The other thing that I received from Grand Valley State University, the charter school area, is their annual report. The last one does not have the COVID school year, but I also wanted to see what the achievement level of the students were in the different public school academies. And they range from much higher than average for the state of Michigan to lower than average. But the one thing that we spent some time discussing is on how some of the public school academies did not have their charters renewed because of lack of progress, significant lack of progress in the students. So there is someone or an organization that should be overseeing the different results from the charter schools. So that is my overall report, Madam Chair, and I'll entertain any questions any of the commissioners might have.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Lara. And if the commissioners don't mind, I'd like to get all of our presenters in and then do questions at the end. Is everyone okay with that? Does that work? Okay, very good. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. TJ Buckholtz from Vanguard, as was mentioned, the consultant who helped us write our original report, and then when we needed someone to help with the funding analysis, stepped up and did that for us also. All commissioners should have received the report that was provided to us from Vanguard on the funding analysis. And TJ, please, the floor is yours for you to present your analysis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners, for giving me a few minutes just to present to you our analysis that we've provided to to the department. Again, our analysis was rooted in the specific recommendations, as Commissioner Elisani said, that came from the meeting in December. We looked at and provided for the commission a side-by-side comparative analysis of really what I would consider a robust foundational allowance sample of schools between 3 significant counties, Genesee, Wayne, and Kent counties. And that's important because when you look at the foundational allowance levels, they are relatively the same. As a matter of fact, when you look at the per pupil dollar on average, charter schools or public school academies receive approximately $240 per pupil less. So there is a difference in the foundation allowances when you look at averages in the 3 counties, and when you look at averages statewide. But what we looked at and what we thought was more germane to the point in the commission's question, and is expounded upon in the memo that you have in front of you, is not necessarily how much money is received by a public school or a charter school, but more about how resources are expended, because we felt that was to ensure that as Vice President of the State Board of Education, President Pugh said, making sure that we are ensuring that dollars go into the classroom directly, that benefit students directly. And what we looked at were several areas in which there are some differences in terms of what public schools provide or pay for, and what public school academies are not required to. Again, the interesting part of looking at schools in an aggregate versus an individual perspective is that some schools provide services that are a niche or required services, and others do not. So it's difficult to compare certainly apples to apples. But when we look at things, and I won't go into and read this out to you, but when we look at requirements for special education, when we look at differences in operation costs and expenditures, when we look at the significant difference between teacher certification and retention, primarily in terms of the #1 cost center for all schools is that of people. And so we looked at how school districts spend their salaries, and spend their money on teacher salaries. And if in your report, we did provide you, I think, a simple chart which looks at the differences between charter school and public school academies. And while the initial starting salary is very similar, when you look at experience levels between public schools and public school academies, that is a significant difference. We also looked at and provided you some resources for issues with employee retirement. We also provided you with some issues in terms of transportation, and hope that those help enlighten your conversation. And I know, Chair Clayton, I only have a few more minutes here, but I would say, I want to go back to, sort of our rationale for suggesting, as Vice President Pugh did, a difference in funding of public school academies versus charter schools. That was based on a lot of different recommendations in terms of removing or considering to remove the profit motive from the operation of schools in Michigan, all schools in Michigan. That's where the recommendation came from. I more than appreciate the commission's take, and I think almost to a commissioner, this is great, which is this document, and I think the founding of this document in the very beginning was designed to be a living, breathing document that we could talk about, that we could help guide conversation on, and we could make recommendations. There are some recommendations in the initial Equity and Education report that are directly the responsibility of this commission. There are dozens of recommendations that you can make over the course of your consideration of those recommendations to do. There are also recommendations in this report where the commission does not have authority and does not have the direct control to make those changes. That does include, unfortunately, funding in Michigan's school system. Again, we created that to drive conversation, and based on the emails that all commissioners, it seems like they've received, that conversation is occurring, and I think that ultimately that's a good dialogue and discussion. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that children in the state of Michigan, especially children of color, are receiving the highest quality education they can in an equitable environment. That is where I think the root of the Equity and Education report, which was accepted unanimously by this commission, tries to tries to draw out. And I think that the analysis that we did, which was obviously a cursory analysis based on the questions of this commission, and we could have spent, I think the analysis was something like 20 pages for you. I think we could have easily spent 2,000 pages analyzing each and every facet here. You know, as I mentioned earlier, charter schools are public schools. They are, you know, an important part of the fabric of our educational system in Michigan. And a majority of students who attend charter schools in this state are children of color. And we have to think about those variables when we look at proposing different policies for approval by the legislature and by the executive branch. So again, I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to any questions that you might have. But again, we've tried to provide you with what we felt was a comprehensive analysis, not just in expenditure and not just in revenue, but in expenditure of how school districts allocate resources to programs. Thank you.
Thank you, TJ. One question I do have for you. When you were preparing the research for the second report, did you take a look at special education at all, and how the difference in how students are handled between traditional public schools and charter schools or different needs students? Did you look at that?
Yeah, so we did in the second analysis look a little bit more clearly at special education and how it is offered. And to that end, we looked at special education resources on the State Department website and also the federal website. And that is included in your report, Chair. But I would say there's so much that has changed in special education service, both in terms of diagnoses and services provided over the course of the last 30 to 40 years. We do know that most, if not all, charter schools, like public schools, offer some special education services. What we do know anecdotally, though, is that by and large, charter schools and public school academies address special education issues that are more on the mild and moderate end of the spectrum, and that public schools have a tendency to have to cope with the more moderate and severe issues that come with special education services. As you know, there are many instances where the cost of educating a child with moderate to severe special education needs is a lot for any school district to absorb. There are federal resources that are available. There are state resources that are available for different programs. You know, we are concerned about a practice which continues to pop up in the research that we did, which is the idea of counseling out, which is a parent who desperately would like to send their kid to a charter school or public school academy, but the child has moderate to severe special education needs, to be recommended to instead install their child in the traditional public school academy because they have better resources to prepare them for that. That is something that, again, when you look at, and again, we provide this to you in the report. And again, it's not meant to be critical of the operation models of public schools versus public school academies. It's just that we know that because of the cost of mandated individual education plans, there are just some public school academies that do not have the resources or the infrastructure as traditional public schools do to manage every student.
And colleagues, please forgive me. I did exactly what I said. We're going to wait till the end to ask questions, and I'm the first one to ask a question in between speakers. So I'm sorry. I will go last when it comes time. I'm sorry. I just realized I did that. So thank you. Mr. Thomas, thank you so much for being here with us this evening and speaking. The floor is yours. You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Chairwoman Clayton, members of the commission. I do appreciate you giving us some opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you again for tackling the challenges associated with education equity in Michigan. There's nothing more important than the education of our young people, particularly our most vulnerable young people. Following your meeting in November, you asked MAPSA for information relating to charter school finances, accountability, and enrollment. Everything you asked for has been provided to you. Charter schools are public schools in every way. They have public boards. They have to take all the same tests Every teacher and administrator must be certified, state certified, and every dime they take in and spend must be publicly reported. Charter schools are public schools, and their students are public school students. They should not be treated any differently simply because of the type of public school they attend. The equity report that we're discussing tonight got it wrong when it recommended that charter school students, most of whom are minority children living in poverty, should be worth less. Your recommendation that funding for these students be reduced by 25%, that we treat them as 3/4 of a person, is horrifying, and to me seems contrary to the creation of this body to safeguard constitutional and legal guarantees against discrimination. The enrollment data you received was compiled by researchers from Grand Valley State University. It shows that charter schools serve a disproportionately higher percentage of minority students and children living in poverty. I'd like to point out two very important data points, just highlighting what Commissioner Lara also highlighted. 49.5% of students in charter schools are African American, compared to 14.1% in traditional public schools. 75.9% of students in charter schools are classified as economically disadvantaged, compared to 47.6% in traditional public schools. Your rationale for taking away from charter school students was that they are somehow hurting traditional public school students. In reality, that's not the case at all. A study by the Thomas V. Fordham Institute, which was authored by a charter school critic, no less, shows that total revenue per pupil in traditional school districts actually goes up when a charter school comes in. Put simply, traditional school districts in Detroit, in Flint, and Grand Rapids did not lose money when a charter school came in. They gained money. Half the children in Detroit, half the children in Detroit, half the children in Flint attend a charter school. How can we look those students in the eyes and tell them that they are not equal to their peers in another school? Going forward, we have so many true challenges in Michigan when it comes to improving educational equity. Taking money away from charter school students and telling them they're worth less moves us in the wrong direction, not the right direction. The children who attend charter schools are overwhelmingly minority children. They're overwhelmingly children who live in poverty. Please don't let your work become a part of the political narrative against charter schools. If you're wading into this public policy debate, please have a standard of care based in fact, not anecdotal rhetoric. Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas, or Chair Thomas, actually. Thank you, Chair Thomas. I will start with comments, questions from commissioners for our three speakers. Yes, Vice Chair Hassan.
Good evening. Thank you, Commissioner Lara. Thank you, TJ, and thank you, Mr. Thomas. I appreciate your input, the information that you brought today. Let me first begin by saying, in the interest of full disclosure and transparency, for many years, I served on the board of a charter school that was overseen by Grand Valley State University, which has been mentioned numerous times today. And I know firsthand the transparency of those boards, the transparency of those schools, the services that they provide, the success rate of students within charter schools, and how resources are utilized and how funds are utilized and expended and how they're reported out. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that I could still be objective, however, in my comments. Having said all that, I read thoroughly the report, or I should say the analysis that was presented by Vanguard. And I'll tell you, I took issue with the second page of the 20+ page document, wherein it indicated that the purpose and the intent of the recommendation is to change the public funding diverted to charter schools, not to penalize them, but rather to remove the profit motive from the business model of private organizations who want to run schools like a business. I took personal offense by that because of my experience in serving on a school board for a charter school for many years that was not run like a business, but rather put the interest of the students first. And their primary goal was in making sure those students got a proper and solid education. Now, that's just one charter school, but it sort of begs the question of how many charter schools do we need to look at to make sure that that is not in fact the case and they were run the way that I saw in serving on that board. And I'll tell you this, and someone mentioned it, and forgive me for not recalling who, but charter schools do have someone to report to. They are assessed annually. And if they don't meet the mark, they're shut down. So from a transparency and an accounting and a solid education model, when you have a university overseeing that education model, in my opinion, that's pretty solid and that's pretty good. And that is not looking at charter schools as running like a business. And so we're trying to take the profit component away from it. Second, I think charter schools provide options, which is why you see a majority of BIPOC communities and students attending charter schools, because they may not. Does everybody still hear me? It's saying my internet is unstable.
We can hear you.
Still good?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. The majority, and I think the facts dictate that, and we've seen it time and time again based on the statistics that were shared here today and the reports that we've seen over the course of the last many months, that a majority of the students that are within BIPOC communities attend charter schools as opposed to your traditional public school. We're talking about whether the money follows the student. There's been some discussion about, if we're giving the 25% to these charter schools, then we're taking it away from public schools. And I don't see that to be the case. I don't see any data that supports that. And then finally, with respect to the educators and somehow how they are less par within charter schools than they are in traditional public schools, I think the numbers tell a different story when you look at the success rate of students that are coming out of charter schools that are being directed and taught by good educators who nevertheless, while their salary may be a little bit less, and to Commissioner Lara's point, which was a very appropriate one, 30 years. You're taking the number of a charter school that's been in existence for 30 years versus the public school system that's been in effect for many, many years. And so, of course, you're going to see that sort of paradigm shift between the salaries. It's inevitable. Nevertheless, I did not see that the quality of the education from these educators and these teachers was any less because they were getting paid salaries that was less than what public school teachers get paid. So I just wanted to put those points out there. And again, thank you all for your background and information. It was invaluable.
Thank you, Commissioner Hassan. Comments, questions from any other commissioners? Anyone else? Okay, I'm not seeing any. There's one thing I do want to touch on. TJ spoke on it a little bit, but I want to make sure that it's just interesting that I believe there are 12, I think it's 12 actual recommendations at the end of the report that, as I mentioned, Alfredo, Director White, his group, and some of the commissioners who have been attending those biweekly meetings are working very hard on those actual recommendations. What we were talking about today was language within the report. It's not even an actual part of our formal recommendations that we had. It was language in the report that, thank you, Chair Thomas, when you initially sent your letter back, I think in October, there are a couple of things that you pointed out to us that were in fact inaccurate in the report, and we made those changes immediately. And to what's been said today, this is a living, breathing document, which is why we are here today talking about this. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows that whether the language stays in, whether the language comes out, that is not something that the commission is able to even effectuate and make happen regarding any type of funding reduction for charter schools, whatever that percentage may be, whatever that recommendation may be. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear, that we are actually working on those things, that we do have some sway over and trying to make those things happen. So again, no other questions or comments from commissioners at this time? Okay.
I'd like to make a motion, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner Hassan.
I move to strike the recommendation of a 25% reduction to charter schools that is found in the list of recommendations within the Education Equity Report that came out of this commission's request.
Okay, a motion has been made by Commissioner El Hassan. Is there a second for that motion?
I second the motion.
It has been seconded by Commissioner Lara. Can I please have the clerk, can we do a roll call vote on this, please?
Madam Chair, is there opportunity for discussion?
Oh, sure. Yes. Yes, thank you.
I guess my only point would be that I am concerned about us lifting it out without any concern, or I guess any language that talks about those well-performing charter schools. And I know this kind of leads us back to the discussion that we've been having in terms of, is there language, or are we considering any language that speaks about a recommendation regarding poor performing charter schools and what that language might look like? I think for me, my concern has always been that children are first and foremost within whatever school district they're in. I certainly know from experience within my own communities of people who've gone to students, young people who've gone to charter schools and been very successful afterwards. And I have heard the same kind of horror stories I hear about public schools, and that there are some charter schools that are very poor performing and still receiving a significant amount of funding. So I'm just wondering if there is any consideration for language that gives any consideration to those schools that are poor performing, or maybe something that this may be something that Chair Thomas or anyone else might want to speak to, any of our other speakers might want to speak to.
So just to answer, not that I'm an expert in this, but I do believe that we talked about that earlier. If, I wish some of our educators, but if there is a poor performing charter school, there are mechanisms in place, correct, for the closures of those schools. I do believe, I look right here out my window and I see a charter school, Woodward Academy, which is an empty building sitting right on I-75 in Lafayette. It was a poor performing charter school that was closed by the state. So, and Chair Thomas, I'll let you speak to that, but if there are already mechanisms in place for poor performing charter schools.
Chair Clayton,
yes.
Before Mr. Thomas gives his, yes, I mentioned it in my comment as well, and we've seen Grand Valley State University charter schools shut down because of poor performance, or really essentially not getting them their deliverables, which include obviously the success rate of the students, utilizing the funds in the appropriate manner, which is why I took issue with the operating as a business. So I think Mr. Thomas might have a little bit more background, but there are mechanisms in place to shut down charter schools that are poor performing.
Okay. Chair Thomas?
Well, Commissioner Al Hassan is absolutely correct that there are. Each of the charter schools are authorized by more times than not one of our state public universities, which are fantastic authorizers. Community colleges are able to authorize, and school districts themselves are able to authorize. You'll get no argument from me that a bad school is a bad school, and poor performing schools should always be replaced with schools that can outperform them. And so the charter school sector and the university authorizers that authorize charter schools, I think, take very seriously their responsibility to ensure that their students are meeting their standards. And they go through an annual review. The commissioner who served on a board knows that there's an annual review, and there's continued constant review to make sure that schools are meeting their requirements. And when they're not, they're put on the same list as a public school, by the Department of Education. And if they don't make satisfactory progress, the university authorizer shuts them down, as they should be.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on this motion before we move to a vote? And I did receive a text message from Bishop Combs. His computer shut down. It was rebooting. He was trying to get back in, but I don't know if he's going to make it back in time for us to take the vote, because we are ready to do the vote. So if the clerk can please call the roll on Commissioner El Hassan's motion, which was to remove the language from the Education Equity in Michigan report recommending a 25% reduction in funding for charter schools.
Thank you. Chair Clayton,
Yes.
Commissioner Combs, Commissioner Gasco-Bentley,
Yes.
Commissioner El Hassan,
Yes.
Commissioner Robeson,
Yes.
Commissioner Kosajaru,
Yes.
Kosaraju, I'm sorry, Commissioner Lara,
Yes.
and I don't see that Combs has returned, but the motion does pass, sir.
Okay, the motion is passed 6-0, so that language will be removed from the report. We will do an updated version of the report, make sure that that is available online and it is put on the commission's website. The only other comment I would like to make as it relates to this and the whole funding piece is when I went back and read, I believe it was 70 something pages, I think, of the transcript from our November 23rd special meeting that we had on this. It was interesting. If you all remember, we had a presentation from some students from the University of Michigan Civil Rights Academy. And I don't know how we missed it, but when I went through and read it, they actually asked at the end of their presentation, I believe it was Jordan who did, that the commission would take a look at and support a weighted funding model for education in Michigan. When the governor gave her state of the state address, she also made reference to that. And when Dan Quisenberry spoke at our meeting on the 23rd, he also said that that was something that the charter schools could take a look at in supporting. So the hope is that, as TJ said, we hope to do, we wanted to get a conversation started. We got a conversation started. And the goal is hopefully we can move forward with that and continue looking at equitable ways of funding education in the state of Michigan. So I thank you, TJ. I thank you, Chair Thomas, for being here with us. And we are going to now move on to the remainder of our agenda, unless any other commissioners have any comments. And I see we have been joined by Commissioner Combs. So, okay, no other comments from anyone. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, Commissioner Combs.
Yes. Are the presenters still on the line?
They are both still here, yes.
Yeah, I had a different perspective with respect to for-profit versus nonprofit charters. And the approach that the Michigan Department of Education has taken to address the issue, I don't think this is the appropriate approach. But I think that Buzz Thomas's presentation was spot on. But we've had this same conversation, Mr. Thomas, with respect to mental health, and particularly behavior health, the privatization of behavior health, and whether or not those dollars that are currently being appropriated to the CMHs across the state of Michigan are actually following the programmatic strategy that they're supposed to follow in making sure the services are being delivered to the patients and consumers served. So it appears that in our universe, that in fact, if you are going to provide behavioral health services, in most cases, you have to apply to contract as a nonprofit, or better said, you can't really be a for-profit entity to enter into contract services for the CMH to take care of persons with behavioral health. Now, that might not be universally true across the 83 counties in the state of Michigan, but that has been a conversation that has come up over and over again. And even with the attempt under Director Haveman, when he was the director of HHS, to move us toward Act 298 and move some pilots in that direction, there still has been pushback because there is a thought that for-profits will lean toward profit as opposed to the mission of service delivery. What are your thoughts on that?
That was a question for me, Commissioner Combs. So
Yes.
Well, I'm not qualified to speak on the question related to mental health delivery. You're taking me to a debate that I remember during my time in the legislature. But I've been out of that game for the past 11 years, so I'm not as versed on that.
But I guess I'm asking the question relative to for-profit versus nonprofit. Our argument is, if you're in the business of delivering services to constituents under the banner of a mission to educate or the banner of a mission to provide healthcare services, you're going to be more true to the mission if, in fact, you are functioning from a nonprofit perspective versus a for-profit. And that's the argument in our universe that nonprofits are better able and suited to do the job. And it seems like this is what the Department of Education is trying to push in this circle and in this situation. That's what I was trying to get your feedback on.
Okay, thank you. So I get it. And, we have this discussion. I've had this discussion with folks within the charter school sector. I view the organization of a company that is managing a school as for-profit or nonprofit is simply the way they file their taxes. And so they file it either as a nonprofit or a for-profit. They each file the same. They each file the same return, and the same go through the same stipulations. Where there are some management companies that have organized as for-profit, it is again a tax treatment, and oftentimes it is a means towards being able to use a bank to finance the development of the facility of the actual charter school, because charter schools are not funded, are not allowed to use the same state dollars for other school districts for their facilities. And so many times, to be eligible to get a traditional bank loan to finance the construction of a charter school, it has been helpful for some schools to be, some management companies to be organized as for-profit enterprises. It doesn't mean that they're making a profit. It simply means that's how they choose to file their taxes.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. Some were trying to argue, some had the argument that, contrary to what you just explained, that the for-profits are obligated to their equity holders. If in fact, the shareholders were involved and investors, they're going to push to make sure that they take care of their investors' return on investment versus the mission of the school versus a nonprofit that in many cases are pushed to zero their dollars out at the end of the year and make sure all dollars are spent for the program mission. But what you just explained is sufficient as far as I'm concerned for the argument. I guess I think that the way that the individuals that are advocating a 25% cut are approaching this is the inappropriate way, because at the end of the day, the program dollars are not going to be there to educate the children. So you're going to undermine choice and you're going to undermine quality education, to your point.
Commissioner Combs, I just want to I know you're having some technical difficulties and you somehow you left the meeting, you weren't connected with us, but during your absence, Commissioner El Hassan did make a motion to remove that language from the report, and the 6 commissioners who were here did vote to remove that language from the report.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm satisfied with that.
Thank you. Any other commissioner comments before we move forward with our agenda? Okay, please remember, we do still have to do public comment. I believe there were 10 hands that were raised at the time, so to make sure that everyone stays on. I just want to very quickly get to our commission business, and then we will get to, not commission business, our new business, and then we will go to public comment. I just had a couple of things for new business, and I am going to then ask if any other commissioners have anything for new business. And there should not be 11. At the time when we cut off public comment, I was told that there were 10. So I'm not sure where the extra hand came in. At the time I was told there was 10 when we cut off public comment.
Madam Chair, there was another individual who got in under the wire.
Okay, so we have 11 public comments at the time. So for our new business, and I'll address that when we get to that. So for new business, you heard Director White, and I also spoke about the instructional retreat that the commission had last month. During that instructional retreat, a couple of things that we talked about. One of the main things was whether or not we were going to form committees, subcommittees within the commission to do some work outside of our commission meetings and then report back to the commission. One of the committees that we talked about was an education subcommittee, and I would like to be on that committee because Commissioner Combs and I are the only two commissioners left standing who were part of this process from the beginning, from the hearings to the writing of the recommendation to where we are now. I'm hoping because of their expertise and their willingness that they have already indicated in working on. Commissioner Combs, can you I think you are on two pieces and mute yourself. Can I have our host mute Commissioner Combs while he's getting everything set? Okay, thank you. So what I would like to ask Commissioner Lara and Commissioner Kosaraju, if you both would be willing to serve on the education subcommittee with me.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, if Commissioner Combs could, Commissioner Combs, can you hear me?
Yes, can our host mute the second where it looks like Commissioner Combs is on his phone? Okay, all right, I think we're good. Okay, so were those yeses that I heard from yes. Commissioner Lara and Commissioner? Okay, thank you so very much. So what we will look to do with this education subcommittee is to continue to work, and I believe the three of us, we've attended the council meeting, so continue to work on the education report recommendations, the 12 that are actually in there. And then also March is National Reading Month, and hopefully we'll be able to try and get some type of a literacy program pilot for the summer that we'll report back to the commission on. Commissioner Kosaraju, I will ask you to say a few words on that when we're done. The other two committees that we talked about, and I'm looking for volunteers on these. One, we talked about a committee to look at the administrative rules, redoing those. That was one that we talked about, and there was a need to be done with that as presented. I believe it was Ms. Elliott who talked about that, Attorney Elliott. And then the other one is on economic equity. Commissioner Combs, you actually brought this to the commission's attention a couple of years ago, and you brought it up again in November. And that's something we did say we were going to take a look at economic equity for minority and woman-owned businesses and contract compliance. So I'm wondering, do you have any interest in leading that particular committee, Commissioner Combs? You're muted, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I'm not interested in leading much of anything, but I would be willing to serve on that committee.
Okay. Do I have any volunteers from any other commissioners who are interested in working on that committee? And I guess I shouldn't say leading because it would be a committee of 3 equal commissioners doing so. Any other commissioners who are interested in working on that particular committee with Commissioner Combs?
Madam Chair, this is an area that I've spent most of my career working on and in, so I'm very interested in that as well.
Okay, and Commissioner Elson, did I see your hand raised?
Yeah, I just have a question. with respect to these committees, do we work with staff within the department, particularly like on the administrative rules, or is that just a committee of 3 commissioners? And the purpose of my inquiry is I'm looking to see what my time commitment.
So I don't know if it's me or if you were dragging just a little bit. It might have been on my end. I'm not sure. But you wanted to know, will these committees be working with staff? What I would envision is, yes, working with staff, especially for the ones related to administrative rules, because that's where the bulk of the information is going to come from, what needs to be done. And there was already a working group within the department. I believe it was Dan Levy, Mary Engelman, Marcelina Trevino, and Sylvia Elliott, who had already started some of this work 2 years ago. So that should be a good starting point. Also, as we were looking at education and the economic equity, I would assume that the commissioners who are on that committee would kind of guide the work, but we would also be able to bring in, just like how Commissioner Lara did with the education equity report, bring in other subject matter experts to help to advise and work with the committee along with the people from within the department. But these are things that we talked about as we look at our year for this year. What is it that the commission wants to tackle besides our education equity report? So that's kind of how I would think that would go if the other commissioners are in agreement with that. And we also did speak about our May meeting, which is our next meeting, focusing on economic equity for minority and woman-owned businesses. And there are some groups we had come in 2 years ago. I would anticipate them coming back, plus others who are now at the table to be a part of this conversation.
Chair Clayton, I'd like to participate on that committee.
Okay, well,
if possible.
Okay, so then do we have Commissioner Combs, Commissioner Robertson, and Commissioner Lara working on the Economic Equity Committee. And so that just leaves us with our Administrative Rules Committee.
I'm happy to help with that.
Okay, we have Commissioner El Hassan. Do we have any other commissioners who want to work with her on that? I will say well, 2 of us can't make up a committee. I just don't know how much of help I would be on that particular committee, not having a legal legal background, and fully understanding how that would work. So maybe we'll just table that one for now, since we don't have anyone wanting.
I'm willing to serve. I don't know what my time commitment. I'm of the same vein. I don't want to overcommit myself and not be able to give it what it deserves, but I'm certainly willing. If it's something the commission wants to start working on, I'm certainly willing to work with Commissioner El Hassan on that too.
Okay, then I'll say, so that we'll have 3 members and have 2 strong attorneys working on that. I will become the 3rd member of that. Understand that we will more than likely be working very, very closely with some of the attorneys in the department and probably some legislative liaison also to try and get this through. So we have, just to summarize, and I want to make sure, Ms. McBride, if we can make sure that this is in the actual meeting minutes, we can have this in the minutes spelled out, that we are forming 3 committees. The first one on education equity, which would be Commissioner Lara, Commissioner Kasaraju, and myself. Our second committee will be taking a look at the administrative rules. That will be Vice Chair El Hassan, Commissioner Robertson, and myself. And then a 3rd committee looking at economic equity, which would be Commissioner Combs, Commissioner Robertson, and Commissioner El Hassan.
Noted, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, any other? Oh yes, Commissioner Lara, did I see your hand raised?
Yes, I thought that I was on the economic equity one.
She's on the economic equity. Yes, she is.
Okay, I'm sorry. Who did I say was on the equity?
El Hassan, but it's Laura.
Okay, it's okay, Commissioner. Oh, yes. So Ms. McBride, please, thank you so much. Please make that correction. The Equity Commission is Commissioner Lara, Commissioner Combs, and Commissioner Robertson.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Any other questions, comments from anyone? Anyone else have anything under new business? Okay, seeing none, we are now going to move to public comment. We do have, is it 11 people that we have for public comment? Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's correct.
Okay. Do any of my fellow commissioners object to if we limit public comment to 1 minute, or do you want the full 2 minutes? I will leave that up to the will of the commission.
Madam Chair, I'm perfectly comfortable with 1 minute. I guess my other question would be, are there a number of public comment speakers who really wanted to weigh in on the issue of education as they did in our email boxes before we actually took the vote? So I don't know if I guess my question would be, do we still have 11 members who still, or 11 members of the public who still want to comment? And certainly if we do, I'm fine with limiting it to just 1 minute instead of the
That is a very good question, because all the hands were lowered and they weren't left raised. We can't see who was still here, so we won't know until they call off the names to find out who is here. But let me give the public comment disclaimer, and we will have 1 minute for public comment. If we can ask those who are handling public comment to get ready. I see our timer is already set, so thank you. We are now going to have the public comment portion of the meeting. We're now ready for public comment. As a reminder, we will be taking comments in the order we have received them. Speakers will have 1 minute to speak before the commission. However, if your comment involves a matter that is currently pending with the department, such as an open complaint or an investigation, it is inappropriate to speak about that before the commission. This is done in fairness to the parties and the process should your complaint come before the commission for a decision and order. Those who are speaking, please keep a look on the screen regarding the time. If you're on the phone, we will give you verbal cues as to when you are at 30 seconds and then when your 1 minute is up. If we can have who is our first speaker, please?
Our first speaker is Kelly McCline.
Okay, and I'm looking, okay, Ms. McCline, I see you are here. You may begin. You're speaking for 1 minute.
Good evening, Commissioner and Madam Chair. I just wanted to really quickly say thank you for removing that language, because although if I understood you correctly, you said you all don't have the actual authority to adjust the funding. Where your stronghold lies is in your recommendations, and words have power. While you may not have the official capacity to remove the funding, I'm pretty sure that the weightness of your verbiage is heavily relied upon. So I just want to say thank you. And charter schools are, you know, with half of Detroit public school children attending charter schools because of the reasons that were outlined, that needs to be paid attention to. The school that is in my neighborhood, and I live in the 05 zip code, it is woefully underperforming, and I chose to send my daughter to a charter school that is overperforming and has been since she's been in kindergarten. So again, I really want to thank you for removing that language, because words do have power.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now.
Our next speaker is Fred Borowski.
Okay, and if we can ask our speakers to identify themselves and their city that they are zooming in from, please.
Good evening, Commissioner. This is Fred Borowski. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
I had the honor of being the first principal of the charter school when Wayne State had a charter school way back when. And I can honestly say that I too want to thank you. My comments were going to be a little different, but your words have power, immense power in this state. I can assure you that the direction that you've taken here is appreciated by the teachers in public charter schools, by the parents. I had the opportunity of working with children. We used to have this thing that we'd say our school was 125% of kids who were put at risk by adults. So charter public schools are doing a job that is needed and is important. And I would just like to commend you again for that. We do need weighted funding for our schools. Every single commission that has in the last couple of years talked about this has called for it. And indeed now the governor has called for it. So what we need is not only more funding, but we need the weighted funding, especially to bring children up to where they need to be. So I just wanted to let you know, thank you. We'll be of any kind of support that we can. It is appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Borowski. Our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Delana Brooks. She might have dropped off.
Madam Chair, there is no Delina on the attendee list. She probably dropped off.
Okay, next up is King Kai.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, if you would please say your name for the record and the city you're calling from.
Okay, I just want to say I have brain injury, so voice might be funny. Corey Holland from Warren, Michigan. Can I speak now?
Oh, yes, sir, we can hear you. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to speak on earlier you was talking about the hate crime complaints. Well, I just wanted to speak because I had to file a lawsuit against Michigan Attorney General Dan National in her office because I filed a hate crime complaint with them about 1.5 years ago because I was attacked by a white LGBT gang who came here from Ohio and then joined up with forces in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm disabled now because of the actions of this group. Reason why I want to speak is because I filed a complaint with the civil rights, but I want to make a point because my complaint was actually thrown away. So and I know if this was a black or brown gang that was brought from another state with the intent to hurt a white person, that complaint would have never been thrown away. So I wanted to make sure I address that with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next, we have Tia Doyle.
Good evening, Ms. Doyle. If you will state your name for the record and the city you're calling from.
Yes, my name is Tia Doyle. I'm calling from Fenton, Michigan. Commissioner El Hassan and Commissioner Lara spoke to the points that I wanted to speak to tonight. So I just want to say that I really appreciate the thoughtful conversation and dialogue that happens. And I even more so appreciate the dismissal of that language from your recommendation. I also want to add, there was some conversation around the vaccinations of our Black community members. And I'm a superintendent in Flint, Michigan at a small charter school. I have 7 full-time staff members who are Black men and women. And of the 7 who were offered vaccinations, only 1 of them decided to be vaccinated. So that wasn't a lack of availability, but I believe it was more so apprehension. I'm not sure how we can address that on a larger scale, but it is definitely concerning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is a phone caller with the last 4 of 8973.
Yes, this is Miss George from Detroit, to Chair Clayton and to the body. I just hope in the future maybe we could go back to 2 minutes because I know there was a motion made to end public comment toward the end and it was already on the agenda. So I just wanted to make a suggestion for a 2-minute comment on that. And I know I wasted 15 seconds saying that, but I wanted to thank the commission for having the presentations. To the speaker before, there is vaccine hesitancy. I do give COVID-19 vaccines, so we just have to get the information on the, why it's so important. Also, with Dr. Wilson, I'm also a graduate of the nursing program at Wayne State University, where I learned a lot about vitamin D. 82% of Blacks are low in vitamin D, which has a lot to do with the poor outcomes. Vitamin D is a cellular vitamin. And so once I'm about to do a national video on it, once we get the information on the importance of vitamin D that help those T helper cells, we will see why, besides the pre-existing conditions, why it is affecting the Black community. Thank you, Chair, and to the Honorable Board.
Thank you. Do we have any more speakers?
Yes, our next speaker is Walter Jones.
Good evening, Mr. Jones. If you state your name for the record and the city you're calling from.
My name is Walter Jones. I am calling from Detroit, Michigan. First, I would like to again thank the Commission for removing the 25% provision from the list of recommendations. Also, I have 45 years of school accounting. I'm a CPA, having spent 15 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers, 5 years as the CFO of Detroit Public School, and then about 20 years of financial experience with all kinds of charter schools. And I mentioned that just to say that I would be more than happy to offer my expertise for any future issues that may come up relative to school funding. I know it like the back of my hand. I've done all aspects of financial accounting with schools. Also, I would like to ask the Commission to start to weigh in on how the CARES money has been distributed. As you may know, Detroit Public Schools receive 4 times more money than the typical charter school. And that inequity is a function of how of those funds being distributed with Title I dollars. And so that formula should not be used. It should be more equitable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Do we have any more speakers?
Yes, we have 4 more. Our next one is Thomas Pedroni.
Good evening, Mr. Pedroni. State your name for the record and where you're calling from, please.
Yes, first, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Thomas Pedroni. I'm an associate professor of curriculum studies at Wayne State University, and I'm calling in from Ypsilanti. The first thing I want to say is after you are a public body, and after waiting for hours to speak, to have it diminished to 1 minute is not a good move for a public body, for me or any of the other speakers. The time slots that were given to people who did speak were mostly very one-sided and did not address a lot of very significant research on charter schools. I wish you had let Pamela Pugh speak more rather than cut her off, because I know she had more to say on this issue. But in my maybe 15 seconds I have left, there is plenty of research conducted in Michigan that shows the way that both for-profit and nonprofit charter schools have moved funding out of the classroom and into administrative salaries. This is well documented. We also know that the reason why white people generally don't choose charter schools is because most of them live in more affluent districts where the public schools work very well. In other communities, oftentimes the public district has been decimated, and so-called school choice, which is a choice for companies often and not for those on the ground, is something that actually has contributed greatly to the decimation of those public schools. And the policies that really need to be addressed have to do with state level policies about funding and the way that so-called choice policies work in our state.
Thank you, Mr. Pedroni. Our next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Judy Levy.
Look, Judy.
Ms. Levy, if you will identify yourself for the record and the city you're calling from. Ms. Levy, you need to unmute yourself. Ms. Levy?
She fell off.
No, she's here. She just has to unmute herself. While Ms. Levy is trying to figure out how to mute herself, we'll go on to the next speaker, please.
Okay, our next speaker is DVSC Kyra.
Okay. Has that person been moved in? Okay, I do see. Oops, where'd they go?
And Madam Chair, one moment. I'm switching between the last person to the next person.
Okay, actually, we could have left the person in who was trying to figure out how to unmute herself, but we can bring her back. I just wanted to give her Ms. Levy, I wanted to give her an opportunity to figure out how to unmute herself.
Madam Chair, it looks like the last caller after Judy also left, so. we
Okay,
can move on.
and Judy left on her own, she hung up? Or did we move her out?
Madam Chair, that is correct. She left on her own.
Okay, do we have anyone else for public comment of the original 11?
Lola Hopcraft.
Okay. Ms. Hopcraft, if you could identify yourself for the record and the city you're calling from.
My name is Lola Hopcraft, and I'm calling from Flint, Michigan. And I wanted to take the time to thank all of the commissioners for your thoughtful conversations and your additional research that you did on the funding equity position. I did want to comment on the special ed issue. I'm the special ed director of a small charter school, and we do not have the option of counseling a moderately cognitively impaired student out of the charter school. We are a public school academy, and we accept the foundation allowance that each child gets. And so we have to accept any and every student that comes into the school. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more speakers?
We do not have any more public comments.
Okay, thank you. And just real quick before we move for adjournment, Commissioner Kasaraju, I'd like to come back to you. We're talking about the Education Committee. I know there are a couple of comments you wanted to make regarding literacy, and I just think this is an appropriate way to have the last comments for our meeting when we're talking about education equity, and in light of the affidavit that the commission, I believe it was 2 years ago, issue regarding literacy being a right. So I'd just like for you to go on and have final comments before we move to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Chair Clayton. I appreciate the time. I just wanted to point out that as we all debate and discuss education equity, that foundation and fundamental to education equity is the ability for the children to be able to read, which we consider as being literate. And sadly, we have statistics that show that even within Detroit Public Schools, almost 3 out of 4 children are exhibiting what they call a literacy gap, which is the children not being able to read at grade level. Whether a third grader is reading at third grade or reading at a first grade level fundamentally will determine the trajectory of his educational career. And I think the COVID has actually exacerbated across, especially in BIPOC children, this literacy disadvantage. And I wanted to really commend you and the commission that we are going to be taking up this task of trying to kind of reduce what COVID has exacerbated, the literacy gap, as well as the summer lull that comes even regardless of having any kind of a pandemic, that children go through a summer lull. And we can do something to that, and making that announcement this month, I really appreciate, which is to mark the reading month that March is. And I appreciate your support in making us come forward with a plan that we will try to implement for the advantage of the children who are going to be really standing behind or fallen behind even further in their ability to just fundamentally read.
Okay, thank you very much. And we actually, before we do adjournment, we do have commissioner comment on our agenda. Are there any other commissioners who want to make comment before we ask for someone to move for adjournment? Bishop Combs, Commissioner Combs.
I want to state that I think the guidance on this issue has been extraordinary. I can appreciate the weighing in of Commissioner Allison and also Laura, the research that she has done to actually dig into the numbers and to go beyond the anecdotal to the empirical. And I also enjoyed Vanguard's presentation. I thought that even though their emphasis and their focus was maybe to some degree, in my view, misguided, overall, I could see where their argument with regard to for-profit versus nonprofit charter school has led them to pursue this endeavor to try to disincentivize charter schools by punishing them. I think it's the wrong way to go. I just think the debate does need to continue, as many have already weighed in and said. because we've had this debate in mental health, and I'm sure Commissioner Elizon knows this in the area of behavioral health for many, many years. And we have fought with the previous Republican administrations who believe in privatization over this issue, because we just don't think that privatizing healthcare for profit is the best way to fund what we do in behavioral health, because of the rise in cost that many times can't be controlled. So I just thought it was fascinating. The entire discussion to me was very fascinating. And when I sit down with Elizon Notes and my good friend Richard McCollum, we'll have a very healthy and hefty debate on the issues.
Thank you, Commissioner Combs. Any other commissioners with comments? Okay, so seeing no other commissioner comments, the next item on the agenda is adjournment. Our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, May 24th. What that meeting is going to, Bishop Combs, can you, okay, what that meeting is going to look like, I don't know, because it will, I guess, depending what happens with the health department, with the state legislature, with the governor, whether or not we'll be meeting like this, or we will be meeting in person. We will find that out, I guess, as we get closer to that date. But right now, our next meeting is scheduled for May 24th. Does someone want to make a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Motion has been made by Commissioner Combs. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Kasaraju. Our meeting is adjourning at 7:30. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.